Well, for more on how artificial intelligence is influencing the way that art is created and viewed, we're joined by Erin-Marie Wallace, Senior Auction Specialist and Auctioneer for the Oakridge Auction Gallery. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, a fascinating topic. We've seen where it started. How much potential is there for what robots and artificial intelligence can bring to the art world?
I think there's a ton of potential. This isn't any different than a brand new medium. You know, you can go back to the 14th century and artists suddenly decided to work with canvas and everyone was astounded. And you can then look at Damien Hirst using a shark. You can look at Marcel Duchamp using a urinal. There's a ton of potential of where this can go. It is still in its infancy, but it's really not groundbreaking.
Now, a lot of people are wondering, is this something necessary? What does bringing AI and robots to the table, what does that bring for art that we didn't have already?
Well, doesn't it really allow artists to use another tool? It puts another tool in their arsenal of things that they can use to create images. And the images really reflect their society, their time, this time and space where we are right now. So 40, let's say 140 years ago, this would have been impossible. And now we get to talk about where we are in the 21st century and utilize all the tools that we've developed.
And why do you think there is this, it almost seems like a divisive topic. It's either the purist artists or people who are like, embrace this as a new tool, much like a paintbrush.
I think it comes down to the limitations of what people want to consider as art. So there's a lot of different definitions. I think for me, one of my favorite ones is that art is something that should inspire discourse and it should also create a feeling within the viewer, even if that feeling is looking at the art and saying, oh, that's not art. It then suddenly actually becomes art. So just by them disliking it, they're proving it.
Now, in terms of things that are perhaps being programmed into these machines and then come out as art, can you really ever, as an AI or robot, produce original art then if it's always coming from source material?
I think that's where you need the programmers as part of the process. The programmers have a level of creativity that I don't think has been quite developed yet in AI, but I'm not going to speak for 50 years down the channel. And when the programmers use AI and robotics to create something new, then you do have new and original art just used by a tool that people aren't familiar with yet.
Does it create something of a gray area, as we heard in that report, about really who then gets final credit for some of this artwork?
I think that is actually becoming a really good point. So if you go back to last month, Christie's sold an AI-generated portrait for something like $430-some thousand. Really solid number, but the question then becomes, did the people who created the open source program, do they have ownership? Does Christie's have ownership? Do the developers of the program itself, does it have ownership? So that is an absolutely legitimate question.
Now, most of the time when we think about robots, we think about how they're used to increase productivity and efficiency rather than to express art. What's your take on these jobs then that are really have only ever been the wheelhouse of creativity?
I think you still are looking at the marriage of art and technology, and it still goes back to the human hand. So going back to the Christie's portrait, while the AI generated the image, the parameters of that image were set up by the input of the programmers. So you still have this marriage between the two.
Now, as we see with most sci-fi movies that involve robots, it doesn't usually end so well for the human beings. So in terms of the concerns that people have about them taking over the world, if they become more self-aware and start making their own decisions, as we saw them doing with the artwork, how valid are those concerns?
I'm not as concerned about the robots, even though robots clearly have the ability to conflict warfare virtually and physically. I'm more concerned about how humans would utilize the robots to get to that effect.
A very interesting take there. Now ethically then, is there or should there be this line between what robots can do and what they should do? Where is the ethics in all this?
There's one really strong way of looking at this. First of all, ethics changes depending on what culture and what country you're in. So I don't really think we have any right to define the ethics. And then you can also look at artists like Damien Hirst, who definitely pushed the lines of ethics. There's another artist named Piero Manzoni. He canned his own excrement, to put it in a nice way. That pushes the line of ethics and art. Why can't robotics? I don't think you can put limits on it.
So perhaps the evolution of art as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Very good to have
Thank
you
you
on.
so
Thank
much.
you so much. Erin-Marie Wallace there, Senior Auction Specialist and Auctioneer at the Oakridge Auction Gallery.